In this video, we're going to talk about chemical bonds, or the forces that hold atoms together in a compound. Because in a compound, you just don't have atoms floating willy-nilly. They're held somewhat in place by chemical bonds. And chemical bonds are simply the attraction between charged particles, that is, electrons and protons. Remember, electrons are negative, protons are positive. Positive and negative attract each other. So the electrons in one atom will attract the protons in the second atom, and so on and so forth. And for this class, we're really going to begin by talking with two types of chemical bonds. One are ionic bonds and one are covalent bonds. So the main difference here is that in covalent bonds, you can actually think of like a spring connecting two atoms. They're held together. While ionic bonds, there's nothing really holding them together except their positive and negative charge. It's like when you have two ends of a magnet together. They will be attracted to each other even though there's nothing physically there. So let's talk about ionic bonds and their bonds between metals and nonmetals. Remember that metals are on the left side of the periodic table, sodium being an example, and nonmetals are on the right side of the periodic table, chlorine being an example. And also remember, when we talk about periodic trends, metals tend to lose electrons, and when they lose electrons, they have more protons than electrons, so they become positive or positive, and they're cations. Non-metals tend to gain electrons. They have more electrons than protons, so they're negative anions, a negative ion. When a metal and a nonmetal come together, the metal atom will want to give an electron to the nonmetal atom because that's what they do. And when you do that, you get a positive ion or a cation and a negative anion. And you have two charged atoms, and so they come together. That is what an ionic bond is. You have a positive ion and a negative ion, and because what are called electrostatic forces, or just the forces between the positive end and the negative end, these two atoms don't want to separate, and so you form an ionic bond. And when you form these bonds, you can have really different properties. So let's look at pure sodium metal here. And sodium is a metal, but it's super soft. You can cut it with a butter knife. And let's look at chlorine gas here. Now, both of these elements on their own are poisonous to us. However, you combine a sodium and a chlorine atom, and you get salt. Sodium chloride, table salt. And you get this repeating pattern where you have anion, cation. They form what's called a lattice, just a repeating pattern, and we get this delicious cube of salt, which is not poisonous to us. And they are held together simply by electrostatic forces, or remember just the forces between a positive and a negative charge. The next type of bonds are covalent bonds, and these happen between non-metal atoms. So for example, carbon and hydrogen, both non-metal atoms. Here, instead of one atom giving an electron to another atom like we have in ionic bonds, here in a covalent bond, the atoms share electrons. That's shown here, where the red is electron from hydrogen, blue is electron from carbon. So they share their electrons. And these covalently bond compounds, we also call them molecular compounds. And you can think of this covalent bond as a spring holding these atoms together. Sure, they have some movement like in a spring, but they're stuck to each other, and it takes a lot of energy to break that spring. Alright, that's it for your introduction to bonds. See you in the next video.